Somewhere near your home, a forgotten tree feeds the birds better than your garden. No one waters it, sprays it, or even remembers who planted it. Meanwhile, garden centers sell fragile trees that require constant care. This difference is not an accident because the system works against common sense. For centuries, fruits have been chosen for their hardiness rather than their appearance. Explorers and settlers relied on plants that produced crops without maintenance. Then the market began to reward fruits that travel well rather than grow. The most persistent old varieties went out of fashion but did not disappear anywhere. Some still bear fruit near roads and abandoned sites. This video will reveal 15 fruits that will outlive your efforts for decades. 2 kilometers from your house right now, there is a tree growing that no one has watered, fertilized, and does not even remember who planted it. But it is quietly dropping kilograms of fruit to the ground. No schedule, no spraying. And 3 kilometers in the other direction, someone just spent $60 at the garden center on one apple tree that will produce 4 apples. 2 with spots, 2 will be carried away by a squirrel before the owner has time to go out into the garden. This gap is not an accident, and this video is about how to close it. Most of us have wasted money and entire growing seasons on plants that required constant attention to produce next to nothing. If this sounds familiar, this video is for you. 15 fruit crops that don't need coddling, resist pests without spraying, and continue to feed you and your family for decades, not just one season. Here's the part that no one includes in gardening manuals. For most of human history, fruit was not something you coddled, but something you relied on. Native Americans selected and cultivated the hardiest, most self-sufficient plants for thousands of years before settlers arrived. The Lewis and Clark expedition survived along parts of the route using only their paws. On September 18, 1806, William Clark wrote in his diary that the expedition was completely without provisions, living on paws, and that they can live very well on paws. Hardy orange hedges have become living fencing on homesteads throughout the Midwest. Elderberry syrup was a staple in country medicine cabinets long before anyone sold it as a supplement. These plants were not curiosities, they were infrastructure. Thomas Jefferson included footweed in his own planting records, recognizing its value to American gardening. Then commercial farming expanded after World War II, and the whole system of priorities was upended. The question ceased to be about what survives and became about what is transported. Hybrid varieties that required specific soil acidity levels, regular fertilization schedules, and annual spray programs were not a design flaw. They were the business model. A fruit tree that thrives from neglect for 100 years is sold once. A fruit tree that needs 4 products to survive sells these 4 products every season. The tough old plants fell out of fashion not because they stopped working, but because no one made money from them anymore. The market began to reward fruits that carried trucks, shelves, and cosmetic sorting. The foot is absent from mainstream grocery chains due to its fragility and difficulty in transporting, which is a pure example of this process. They didn't disappear completely. They still grow there, in abandoned lots and along old fences, completely indifferent to whether anyone notices them. This list recovers 15 of them. As we go through the list, I'll highlight a few of them with additional details beyond the basic specs, combination strategies, timing details, and things most sources miss. Following on from the last point, I have a specific 3-plant combination strategy that puts this entire list on top of 3 tricky spots that are already in almost every yard. It's worth waiting for this moment. 1 for shade, 1 for wet ground, and 1 for vertical space will be part of the final system. This will turn the information into a plan that you can implement this fall. Here are 15 forgotten fruits that basically grow themselves. Number 1, the mulberry, a plant that never stops giving. Here's what almost no one mentions when they talk about mulberries. They don't just produce a lot of fruit, they produce it within 6 to 8 weeks. This means you are never overwhelmed with a bushel at once, as is the case with most fruit trees. The harvest distributes itself and allows you to cope with it gradually. These trees grow in any soil, sand, clay, compacted urban dirt. It doesn't matter what. They are drought tolerant, tolerate wet conditions, no major pest pressure, no diseases to worry about. Cold-resistant, heat-resistant, bear fruit just 2 to 3 years after planting. The fruit resembles an elongated blackberry and tastes sweet with just enough sourness to remain interesting. One mature mulberry tree will give you buckets, not bowls, but buckets of fruit in a season. Birds are obsessed with them, making the area around the mulberry tree one of the best spots for wildlife in any yard. This bird detail will become important later, so keep it in mind. One practical note: don't plant mulberries over your driveway or patio. The fruit gets dirty. Plant it in a corner where the clutter becomes mulch, and then just let it grow. 2 plants on the list, and it's a completely different picture from what the garden center sells. The following solves a problem that most yards have, but almost no one thinks to solve with a fruit plant. Number 2, hardy kiwi, 100-pound vine. Here's a number that sounds like a typo until you check it: 100 pounds of fruit per vine. Hardy kiwis look nothing like the fuzzy brown ones from the grocery store. These are smooth-skinned, about the size of a large grape, and you eat them whole without peeling. The flavor is sweeter and more concentrated than anything you'll find on the shelf. The vines are cold hardy down to -25 degrees Fahrenheit. They grow quickly, covering a fence or arbor in a couple of seasons, and once they gain strength around the 3rd or 4th year, they continue to produce more the longer they are installed. They don't get the fungal diseases that plague commercial kiwi. Pests mostly ignore them. They even fruit in partial shade, although sunnier positions greatly increase yield. While most fruiting plants plateau at a certain level of production and stay there, the hardy kiwi accumulates. The longer it grows, the more it gives. Number 3, elderberry, is the easiest moist soil plant on this list. Most fruiting plants hate wet feet. Elderberries don't care. If you have a low spot in your yard where the water sits after rain, where other plants are drowning, where you've basically written off that corner as useless, that's prime elderberry territory. These bushes grow 8 to 12 feet tall in just a couple of years. They produce huge, flat clusters of tiny, dark purple berries. One established bush will give you 10 to 15 pounds of fruit a year reliably without any intervention. Elderberry tolerates cold, tolerates heat, grows in sun or partial shade, and attracts pollinators in waves during its late spring blooms. The berries are used in syrups, jams, wines, and dried like raisins. They have been a mainstay in European households since before anyone wrote things down. Here's one of those extra details I promised to point out. Elderberry produces significantly more with a companion nearby. One bush is productive. 2 bushes planted close together and cross-pollinating each other will dramatically increase your berry yield. Number 4, paw, is a tropical fruit that grows in the shade. Most fruit trees require full sun. Paw is an exception. And that exception is worth a lot if your yard has a shaded corner that does nothing. Paws are America's largest native fruit. The Lewis and Clark team ate them when other food ran out. They taste like someone mixed banana, mango, and custard together and then forgot to include any tropical care requirements. They grow naturally in forest floors across the eastern United States from Michigan to Florida, which means partial shade is not a compromise. It is literally where they evolved. They have almost zero pest pressure because their leaves contain natural compounds that most insects find repulsive. Deer don't bother them, cold hardy, can tolerate humidity, no spray schedule. The only real catch is patience. Paws take 5 to 7 years to begin producing fruit, but once they do, they produce for decades. The fruit that comes off the ripe foot is unlike anything you can find in any grocery store in North America. A shaded corner, a place you thought was useless. Plant a paw, come back in 5 years, and reconsider your opinion about that corner completely. Number 5, chokeberry, antioxidant champion. Here's the mistake that kills most people's interest in chokeberries before they even get started. They eat one raw berry, their mouth wrinkles at the tartness, and they write off the entire plant. It's like biting into a raw coffee bean and deciding you don't like coffee. Cooked, dried, squeezed, or blended into a smoothie, chokeberries are excellent, and the nutritional profile behind them is not marketing copycat supplements. Measured antioxidant levels are higher than blueberries, higher than acai, higher than almost any fruit advertised on a health product label right now. The bushes grow 6 to 8 feet tall, tolerate cold as low as -40 degrees Fahrenheit, tolerate both moist and dry soil, and grow in full sun or partial shade. They produce heavy loads of dark purple berries every fall without fail. No diseases, no pest pressure, no investment once installed. Plant the chokeberry somewhere where you intend to forget about it. Show up in October with a bowl. A quick checkpoint here. The elderberry combination piece from number 3 will appear again in a completely different plant family just a couple of sections later. Number 6, serviceberry, a blueberry that really wants to cooperate. If you've ever spent a full season adjusting soil acidity, trying to grow blueberries, testing, adding sulfur, waiting, testing again, still wrong, adding more sulfur, and ending up with a handful of berries for the effort, serviceberry is a conversation you should have had in the first place. Serviceberry produces blueberry-flavored fruit, sweet and rich with a hint of almond, without ever needing to amend the soil. It grows as a tree, large bush, or hedge, depending on the variety, from 6 to 20 feet in height. Tolerates cold and heat, grows in sun or partial shade. It bears fruit reliably every spring without failure. One of the first plants to bloom in the season, making it important for early pollinators. Birds love the fruit, which functions as a natural seed dispersal system, meaning that one planting of serviceberry ultimately gives you more plants for free without any replanting effort on your part. Disease-resistant, drought-tolerant once established, does not ask for anything after the first season. The fruit ripens in June, the name is literal, the results are not. Number 7, American persimmon, is a centennial plant. Keep this especially in mind. It comes back in the post-leaf strategy at the end. A mature American persimmon tree can produce fruit for over 100 years, not as a record, but as a documented baseline. You could plant one today and your great-grandchildren would still harvest it. The settlers who introduced these plants into their homestead plantings understood something about time horizons that most modern gardeners have completely lost, that the best planting decisions you make today are the ones that continue to pay off long after you're gone. American persimmons are native to the eastern United States, adapted through a huge range of climates: heat, cold, drought, humidity. They grow in poor soil, do not need spraying, and pests leave them alone. The fruit, when fully ripe, is somewhere between caramel and apricot, sweet, rich, and unlike anything in the grocery store. The issue of time confuses people more than anything else. Harvest persimmons too early and they are aggressively tart. Wait until the fruit is completely soft or falls naturally from the tree, and the experience is completely different. Number 8, dogwood, an ornamental tree that also feeds you. Here's a question most people never think to ask when purchasing ornamental trees. Why doesn't this tree also produce food? Most ornamental trees are a one-time investment. You pay for them, you plant them, they look nice, and that's the entire return on the decision. The common dogwood does everything an ornamental tree does. Beautiful structure, early seasonal interest, great presence in the landscape, and then it also produces fruit. Technically a dogwood, not a cherry at all, it produces small, oblong red fruits that are tart enough to make exceptional jams, syrups, and traditional Eastern European fruit marshmallows. Grown across Europe and Asia for thousands of years, it is almost completely unknown in North America. The tree blooms in late winter, sometimes in February or March, with bright yellow flowers that appear before anything else in the garden. This early flowering is a real lifeline for bees, emerging before the rest of the landscape has anything to offer. The fruit ripens in midsummer, is cold-hardy to -30 degrees Fahrenheit, survives drought, grows in poor soil, and tolerates urban conditions that would stress most ornamental plants. Number 9, Nanjing cherry, the bush that beats the weather. Here's what most people get completely wrong about cherries. They represent a tall tree, a ladder to reach the fruit, and a narrow climate window that excludes half the country. Nanjing cherry is none of this. It is a bush 6 to 10 feet tall and is harvested entirely from the ground. Cold hardy to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, it thrives in poor sandy soil where other fruiting plants give up completely. Drought-resistant, rarely gets sick, produces small tart cherries in just 2 to 3 years from planting. In early spring, before almost anything else in the garden moves, the Nanjing cherry tree covers itself with pink flowers. It is one of the most reliable early sources of nectar available to pollinators, and it turns these flowers into fruit without requiring much on your part. As I mentioned, coming out of the dogwood section, plant these two together. Common dogwood blooms in late winter. Nanjing cherry follows weeks later in early spring. In between, you have continuous ornamental interest, overlapping pollinator support, and 2 harvests through the earliest part of the season from 2 plants that together cost less than establishing one high-tech hybrid from the garden center. Number 10. The hardy fig, a survivor that feeds itself. 200 figs a year from one mature tree is not an exceptional season. It is normal. Most people hear figs and think tropical. The reality is that certain varieties, Chicago hardy being the most proven for cold climates, survive winters down to -10 degrees Fahrenheit. And even when the top growth dies in severe frost, the root system survives and sends out new growth that bears fruit the same season. Figs grow in containers and in the ground, poor soil and rich soil. They tolerate heat, humidity, and neglect better than almost any other fruit-bearing plant on this list. The fruit does not need to be processed. You pick it and eat it. Planted figs are drought-resistant enough to produce through summers that kill other plants without a drop of additional water. There is a documented pattern of fig trees growing in pavement cracks, in abandoned lots, in the corners of old stone buildings, thriving only on rainwater and decades of being left alone. Apply this level of persistence to your intentional garden space, and production becomes essentially guaranteed. Number 11, coastal plum, a soil survivor that also makes jam. These native coastal shrubs grow about 6 feet tall, produce white flower clusters in the spring, and give you small, intensely flavored plums that make exceptional jam. They tolerate sandy soil, salt spray, drought, and harsh conditions that most ornamental plants cannot survive in one season. They spread to form clumps, one plant becoming several over time, increasing production without any replanting effort on your part. Commercial growers leave coastal plums alone because the fruit is too variable for mass production. This variability is completely irrelevant to the home gardener. What matters is consistent annual production and zero investment once established. Coastal plum delivers it all at once. They are adapted to harsh coastal conditions from Maine to North Carolina, which means they thrive in conditions where other fruiting plants struggle or fail outright. If you have a site with sandy soil, windy conditions, or salt stains in the winter, coastal plum turns these problems into productive assets. Number 12, 11 angustifolia, a productive outlier. Let's talk about this in advance. In some regions, the Angustifolia oleagin is listed as invasive because it grows so aggressively. Check your local regulations before boarding. The University of Minnesota says the Angustifolia plant is on the USDA's list of terrestrial invasive plants, fixes nitrogen, alters soil chemistry, and can eliminate other plant species. If it's on the banned list in your state, skip to number 13. If it's legal where you are, and especially if you have a large property, a degraded area, or land where nothing productive is currently growing, 11 angustifolia is one of the highest yielding plants on this whole list. One mature bush produces 30 to 40 pounds of small red berries per season. These berries contain lycopene at levels higher than tomatoes, not a supplement claim, a measured nutritional fact. Plants fix nitrogen by growing in clean sand or clay without any amendment, enduring drought conditions that would devastate most fruit bushes. Rule with 11 angustifolia management. Use it specifically on confined land, away from wild areas where it could spread beyond your property line. Number 13, Chickasaw plum, the hedge that feeds you. Imagine a property line with nothing on it. For 3 years, the same border is dense, productive bush providing privacy, wildlife habitat, erosion control, and pounds of sweet plums every summer. All from one original landing. Chickasaw plums spread by root suckers, one plant becoming many. This is not an accidental feature. It is precisely why settlers across the southern United States used Chickasaw plums specifically as living fence lines. Once planted, they established themselves, spread on their own, and became a self-sustaining infrastructure that also produced food. Some of those original fence plantings are still standing and still bearing fruit. The plums are small, about an inch across, but intensely flavored and excellent fresh or canned. Plants tolerate heat, drought, and poor soil without complaint. They bloom in white flower clusters in early spring and provide cover for birds and beneficial insects through the season. Once established, the Chickasaw plum doesn't need anything from you. This is one of the few plants on this list that functions as food production, property management, and wildlife habitat at the same time. Number 14. Loquat, a forgotten fruit from Roman times. Loquat was grown in Roman gardens and moved across medieval Europe as a staple garden tree. Shakespeare made reference to it, and then, sometime in the 20th century, it simply fell out of circulation, not because it stopped working, but because the commercial system had no use for it, and the garden fashion moved on. The fruit looks unusual, like a large rose hip with a flattened top, and it requires a process called post-harvest curing, where you let it soften at room temperature before eating. It sounds fancy until you try the result. Soaked loquats are sweet and deeply complex, tasting somewhere between spiced apple butter and brown sugar with a texture unlike anything else in the fruit world. It's the kind of flavor that makes you immediately understand why it survived in gardens for 2,000 years before someone decided to stop growing it. Loquat trees are cold hardy, grow in average soil, have virtually no pest problems, produce beautiful white flowers in the spring, and display impressive fall color before the fruit hangs late in the season. Often harvested after the first frost, these trees live and produce for over 100 years. Number 15, hardy orange, living legacy. Survives winters down to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Hardy orange, also called three-leaf orange or Poncerus trifoliata, produces small, intensely sour fruits that are exceptionally flavorful and make excellent marmalade. But the reason why this plant earned its place in the estate's history has almost nothing to do with marmalade. The hardy orange has thorns that are not decorative, they are massive, structural, and completely effective. The plant grows into a dense, impenetrable hedge, a type of barrier that stops livestock, deters predators, and requires no maintenance to continue doing its job. Pioneers across the American South and Midwest planted it specifically as a living fence because once established, it maintained itself indefinitely. Those hedges were planted once and functioned for generations. Some of the original plantings are still standing today, still bearing fruit, still functioning as barriers more than a century after the people who made the decision have left. Plants do not need care, tolerate any soil, and survive drought without trembling. They bloom with fragrant white flowers in the spring, bear fruit in the fall, and maintain green stems through the winter as year-round structural interest in the landscape. That's what I promised at the beginning, and this is the part that makes everything on this list practical and not just interesting. Most yards have 3 problem areas: a low, damp corner where water sits after rain, a shaded area that doesn't seem useful for growing anything, and a sunny area that isn't currently producing anything. The combination strategy is about matching the right plants from this list to those 3 specific locations: a damp corner, 2 elderberry bushes, as I noted in number 3. Elderberry thrives where other plants drown, and 2 plants together cross-pollinate and dramatically increase the berry yield of a single plant. Place them at the lowest point in your yard and let a drainage problem become a productive asset. That space ceases to be a liability the season you plant them. The shaded area, the foot, as illuminated in number 4, the foot evolved in forest undergrowth. She doesn't just tolerate shadow, She prefers it. While every other fruiting plant competes for your sunniest soil, Foot fills up the space you thought was wasted. 5 to 7 years of patience, then decades of production from a corner that did nothing. Sunny area, mulberry plus American persimmon. This is where the bird detail from #1 pays off. Mulberries produce fruit from early summer to midsummer and attract enormous bird traffic to that area of your yard. Persimmons bear fruit in the fall after the mulberries are completely finished. Birds that have spent the summer around your mulberry tree will naturally move to the persimmon tree in October. And this steady wildlife activity helps with pest control across the surrounding garden area through both seasons. As I noted in #7, plant male and female persimmons together for significantly better yields. The same principle I noted for elderberries, companions matter. This is a complete setup: elderberry in a damp place, paw in the shade, mulberry and persimmon in the sun. 4 to 5 plants applied to areas that most properties already have produce fruit from June to October, requiring little or nothing from you after the first season. One planting decision, decades of return. If you like this video, please subscribe to this channel and be part of our growing community. Please also like and share so that it can reach a wider audience of gardening enthusiasts who might also find the information shared in this video useful. Which plant from this list do you plant first? And where in your yard are you finally going to do something about it? A damp corner that's always been a problem, a shaded area that seemed useless, or a sunny space that's just waiting for the right solution? Write it in the comments below. Tell us which of 3 yard challenges describes your property best, and we'll move on to talk about how to turn those challenges into productive assets that feed you and your family year after year.